My name is Father Jonathan Peters, and I have dedicated my life to battling the forces of evil. My reputation as an exorcist has taken me to the darkest corners of the human soul, but nothing could have prepared me for the request I received one fateful evening. A serial killer on death row, known for his gruesome and inexplicable crimes, had asked for me specifically. He claimed to be possessed, and it was this demonic influence that drove him to murder. Skeptical but driven by a morbid curiosity, I decided to confront this evil head-on. What I discovered would forever blur the line between man and monster. I received the call late at night. The voice on the other end was stern and urgent. It was the warden of a maximum security prison. "Father Peters, we have an inmate on death row who is requesting an exorcism. His name is Michael Larson, and he insists that a demon drove him to commit his crimes." My initial reaction was one of skepticism. Serial killers often invent stories to delay their inevitable fate. However, there was a part of me, the part that had witnessed true evil, that couldn't dismiss the possibility outright. The next morning, I made my way to the prison, my mind racing with questions. Upon arrival, the prison's cold, gray walls loomed over me, casting long shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. The warden met me at the gate, his face etched with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Father, I must admit, this is the first time we've had a death row inmate request an exorcism," he said as we walked through the narrow corridors. "Larson is different. His crimes were brutal, but he shows no signs of the typical psychopathy we see in killers of his caliber." As we approached Larson's cell, the air grew heavier, as if the very atmosphere was charged with an unseen malevolence. I could hear his faint whispers before I even saw him. The guards stood on edge, their hands hovering near their weapons. When the cell door opened, I was confronted with a man who didn't fit the image of a cold-blooded killer. He was gaunt, his eyes sunken and dark, but there was a glint of something unsettling in his gaze, something that sent a chill down my spine. Sitting across from Larson, I introduced myself. "I'm Father Jonathan Peters. You requested an exorcism?" His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I felt as if he could see straight into my soul. "Yes, Father," he replied, his voice eerily calm. "I am possessed by a demon. It is this demon that made me commit those heinous acts." There was no trace of hesitation or deceit in his voice. His conviction was chilling. Larson began to recount his experiences. He described waking up in the middle of the night to find strange symbols carved into his cell walls, symbols that he insisted he had no memory of creating. He spoke of voices that taunted him, urging him to commit unspeakable acts. "They speak to me in ancient tongues, Father. They tell me things about my victims that I couldn't possibly know." As he spoke, I couldn't help but feel a growing unease. His claims were typical of possession cases I had dealt with before, but there was something more, something darker, about his story. To further convince me, Larson showed me the symbols etched into the walls of his cell. They were unlike anything I had ever seen, intricate and menacing, radiating a palpable sense of dread. He described losing chunks of time, waking up to find his hands stained with blood that wasn't his. The guards corroborated some of his stories, recounting instances where Larson would scream for hours in languages no one understood, his voice shifting between tones and pitches in ways that seemed impossible for a human throat. Despite my initial skepticism, I couldn't ignore the evidence before me. Each piece of Larson's tale, each chilling detail, pulled me deeper into the darkness surrounding him. There was an evil here that transcended mere human cruelty, an evil that demanded confrontation. I left the prison that day with a heavy heart, knowing that I was stepping into a battle that could consume my very soul. As I prepared for the first exorcism, a familiar but intensified weight settled over me. That night, in my room, I spent hours in prayer and meditation, seeking the strength to confront whatever darkness lurked within Michael Larson's soul. I packed my case with sacred items, holy water, a crucifix, and the ancient text of the Roman ritual. The prison chaplain, Father Thomas, volunteered to accompany me. He shared my skepticism, but also my curiosity and the need to face evil directly. When we arrived at Larson's cell, the atmosphere felt even more oppressive than before. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch and twist, forming almost human figures that vanished when we tried to focus on them. Larson was strapped to the bed, his eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made me falter for a moment. I began the ritual with a lump in my throat, feeling the presence of something unspeakable. As soon as I started praying, Larson began to convulse in unnatural ways, his joints cracking as if his bones were moving against his will. His voice changed, becoming deep and distorted, as if multiple voices were speaking through him. "You think your prayers can save him, Father?" the voices mocked. "He belongs to us now." Father Thomas and I exchanged uneasy glances. This was no ordinary case of possession. The malevolence radiating from Larson was palpable, a darkness that seemed to seep into the very walls of the cell. I continued the ritual, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at the edges of my resolve. Larson's body twisted violently, and a guttural scream erupted from his throat, echoing through the prison corridors. The guards outside the cell tightened their grip on their batons, their faces pale with fear. "We know you, Jonathan," the voices hissed. "We know your secrets." Sweat poured down my face as I intensified my prayers, brandishing the crucifix and splashing holy water on Larson. His skin sizzled where the water touched, and he thrashed against the restraints with inhuman strength. Suddenly, he broke free, launching himself at me with eyes ablaze with malevolence. The guards rushed in, wrestling him back onto the bed and securing him once more. Breathing heavily, I paused to regain my composure. This was only the beginning, but it was clear that I was dealing with a force far more powerful than I had anticipated. I looked into Larson's eyes, searching for any sign of the man he once was. For a brief moment, I saw a flicker of something. Fear, perhaps, before the demonic presence reasserted itself. "We are not done, Father," the voices growled. "This is only the beginning." Shaken but undeterred, I left the cell that night with a renewed sense of purpose. This was not just a battle for Larson's soul, it was a battle for my own. The darkness had issued its challenge, and I had no choice but to see it through to the end. The real fight was only just beginning, and I could feel the weight of ancient evil pressing down upon me, waiting for the next confrontation. Determined to understand the source of the evil within Michael Larson, I embarked on a quest for answers. The first step was to delve into Larson's past. Sitting in my small office, I pored over police reports, psychological evaluations, and any scrap of information I could find about his life. His history was a litany of abuse and trauma, but nothing that could definitively explain his claims of possession. His childhood was marked by neglect, his adolescence by violence. Yet, despite this grim background, something felt incomplete. One late night, amidst stacks of reports and dim light, I stumbled upon a lead. A name appeared repeatedly in Larson's life: his grandmother, Abigail Larson. Described as a deeply religious woman, some mentioned her involvement in obscure and archaic rituals. Intrigued, I decided to dig deeper. I discovered that she had died under mysterious circumstances, and rumors hinted at her being involved in occult practices. Seeking further clarity, I reached out to fellow exorcists and theologians, hoping their collective knowledge could shed light on this case. Their responses were varied, but one thing became evident: Larson's case was unprecedented. Some warned me to abandon the mission, fearing for my safety and soul. Others offered support, sharing ancient texts and prayers that might prove useful. During one of these consultations, I spoke with Father McAllister, an experienced exorcist who had retired after decades of battling darkness. His voice, though aged, carried the weight of authority and wisdom. "Jonathan," he said, "there are forces at play here that go beyond a simple possession. You must tread carefully. Sometimes, the darkness seeks out specific souls for reasons we may never understand." As the days turned into weeks, I became more deeply entangled in the mystery. My sleep was plagued by nightmares, visions of Larson, his eyes burning with demonic fire, and shadows whispering secrets I couldn't comprehend. One morning, I awoke with a start, a single name echoing in my mind: Emily Turner. She was Larson's last victim, a young woman who had attended my parish. I dug through old parish records and discovered Emily's diary, which had been passed on to me by her grieving mother. As I read through its pages, my heart sank. Emily had written about a dark force that had been stalking her for weeks before her death. She described seeing a shadowy figure at the edge of her vision, whispering her name, filling her with an unexplainable dread. The last entry was particularly chilling. The darkness is closer now. It speaks of him, of Larson, but it also speaks of another, someone it knows well. A cold realization washed over me. The connection between Larson and his victim was not coincidental. This malevolent force had orchestrated their meeting, and somehow, I was a part of this web of evil. The darkness had not only found Larson, it had found me. Haunted by this revelation, I sought solace in prayer, but the answers eluded me. The weight of my past, long suppressed, began to resurface. Memories of my own childhood fears and inexplicable occurrences that I had long buried came flooding back. Was it possible that this demon had been part of my life for longer than I realized? With a heavy heart, I returned to the prison, knowing that I had to confront Larson once more. But this time, it was not just about exorcising a demon from a condemned man. It was about uncovering the truth about my own past and the dark forces that had intertwined our fates. As I walked through the prison gates, I felt the oppressive weight of destiny bearing down on me. The battle was far from over, and the true horror was only beginning to reveal itself. With renewed determination and a deeper understanding of the darkness at play, I prepared for the second exorcism. This time, I knew it would not be enough to merely confront the demon within Michael Larson. I had to confront the shadows lurking in my own past. Days before the exorcism, I fasted and prayed, seeking spiritual fortification. I visited sacred sites, seeking blessings and relics that might aid me in the battle to come. The night before, I had a dream, or perhaps it was a vision. I saw Larson, bound and thrashing, and myself standing over him, reciting prayers. But there was another presence in the room, a shadowy figure watching from the corner, whispering in a language I could not understand. When I awoke, the memory of its malevolent gaze lingered, fueling my resolve. Father Thomas and I arrived at the prison under a heavy blanket of tension. The guards, having witnessed the horror of the first attempt, were on edge, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. As we approached Larson's cell, I noticed the air was thick with an almost tangible darkness, a suffocating presence that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Inside the cell, Larson lay restrained, his eyes closed. As we began the ritual, his body started to convulse immediately. The air grew colder, and the lights flickered ominously. My voice echoed off the walls as I invoked the name of Christ and commanded the demon to reveal itself. Larson's eyes snapped open, glowing with an unnatural light. "We meet again, Father," the demonic voice hissed, a chilling blend of Larson's and something far older. "You cannot banish me. I have been a part of you for longer than you know." Ignoring the taunt, I continued the exorcism, splashing holy water and brandishing the crucifix. Larson's body contorted, bending in ways that seemed impossible. His screams reverberated through the cell, a horrifying blend of human agony and demonic rage. The temperature plummeted, our breaths visible in the frigid air. Suddenly, Larson spoke directly to me, his voice eerily calm amidst the chaos. "Do you remember your great-grandfather, Father Jonathan? He tried to banish me too. He failed." A cold shiver ran down my spine. How could Larson, or the demon, know about my great-grandfather? My mind raced as I tried to recall the stories my family had told, the whispers of a dark force that had plagued us for generations. This demon had indeed known my family, had been a shadow lurking in the background for decades, perhaps centuries. My resolve strengthened by this revelation, I intensified my prayers. I could feel the demon's grip on Larson weakening, its shrieks growing more desperate. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I command you to leave this man," I shouted, my voice filled with a newfound fervor. Larson's body convulsed violently, and for a moment, I thought we had succeeded. But then, with a final, guttural roar, Larson broke free from his restraints with inhuman strength. He lunged at me, his eyes blazing with a hellish fire. The guards rushed in, tasers drawn, and managed to subdue him after a brutal struggle. As they dragged Larson back to his bed, his eyes met mine one last time. "This isn't over, Father," he whispered, his voice a chilling blend of menace and certainty. "We are bound, you and I." Exhausted and shaken, I left the prison that night with a heavy heart. The exorcism had not succeeded, but I had learned a crucial truth. The demon was not merely an external force. It was intertwined with my very existence, a dark shadow that had haunted my family for generations. The battle was far from over, and I knew that the next confrontation would be the most dangerous yet. The true nature of the evil I faced was beginning to reveal itself, and I could feel the weight of destiny pressing down on me. The final showdown was approaching, and I had to be ready. Returning to my parish, I was haunted by the demon's words. I knew I needed to confront my fears and uncover the truth about my family's past. I sought solace in prayer, but the answers remained elusive. Memories from my childhood began to resurface, dark, unsettling fragments I had long buried. I knew I had to delve deeper. I started by visiting my family home, an old Victorian house filled with dusty relics and forgotten memories. In the attic, amidst cobwebs and old trunks, I found a box of my great-grandfather's belongings. Amongst them was his journal, worn and weathered by time. I spent hours reading his accounts of battling dark forces, encounters with demons, and his ultimate failure to banish a particularly malevolent entity. His final entries were the most disturbing, filled with fear and despair. He had come to believe that the demon had not only targeted him but had marked our family line. This revelation chilled me to the bone. The demon had indeed known my great-grandfather, and it had pursued my family ever since. It was a relentless predator, biding its time, waiting for the right moment to strike. The connection between Larson and me was no coincidence. The demon had orchestrated it all. I sought the counsel of Father McAllister once more. Over a crackling phone line, I recounted my discoveries. His silence on the other end was telling. "Jonathan," he finally said, "this demon is not just a random spirit. It's a powerful entity with a long history. It has chosen your family for a reason. You must be prepared for a fight unlike any other." Armed with this knowledge, I knew I had to prepare for the final confrontation. I gathered relics, holy artifacts that had aided my ancestors in their battles against darkness. I fortified myself with prayers and blessings, seeking strength and protection from every source available. One night, as I was deep in prayer, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Emily Turner's mother, her face etched with sorrow and fear. She handed me an old photo album. "You need to see this," she said, her voice trembling. As I flipped through the pages, I saw images of Emily as a child, smiling and carefree. But then, I came across a photo that made my blood run cold. It was a picture of Emily at a church event, and in the background, barely noticeable, was a shadowy figure. Its eyes seemed to burn with an unholy light. "I saw that figure around Emily for weeks before she died," her mother whispered. "I thought it was my imagination, but now I know it was real. It was the demon." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. The demon had not only targeted Emily, but had also ensured our paths crossed. It was manipulating events, weaving a web of terror and possession. The realization that this ancient evil had been stalking me and those connected to me was terrifying, but it also steeled my resolve. I knew that to defeat the demon, I had to confront my own past and the dark legacy of my family. The final showdown would require all the strength and faith I could muster. With the relics and blessings of my ancestors, I prepared for the ultimate battle. The evil had revealed itself, and now it was time to face it head-on. As I walked through the familiar streets of my parish, the weight of destiny pressed heavily upon me. The demon had issued its challenge, and I was ready to accept it. The true nature of the evil was now clear, and I knew that this fight would determine not only Larson's fate, but also the fate of my soul and my family's legacy. The darkness had haunted us for generations, but it would end with me. The final confrontation was inevitable, and I could feel the sinister presence lurking in the shadows, waiting for the decisive moment. I was ready to face the darkness, to confront the demon that had plagued my family for so long. The battle was coming, and I would not back down. The true horror was about to unfold, and I was prepared to fight it with every ounce of my being. With newfound resolve and fortified by the relics and blessings of my ancestors, I returned to the prison. The guards were wary, their eyes reflecting the fear and uncertainty that hung thick in the air. They had witnessed Larson's unnatural strength and the demonic presence within him, and they knew that tonight could be even worse. As I walked the cold, echoing corridors of the prison, the atmosphere felt different, heavier. It was as if the very walls were closing in, amplifying the sense of impending doom. Larson awaited in his cell, his eyes burning with a malevolent gleam that chilled me to my core. The demon knew I was coming, and it was ready for me. I entered the cell with Father Thomas at my side. He carried a bag filled with holy artifacts, and his face was set with grim determination. Larson lay strapped to the bed, but his body was tense, his muscles coiled like a predator ready to strike. I began the exorcism, my voice steady and firm as I recited the ancient prayers. The air grew colder, and the lights flickered ominously. Larson's body convulsed violently, his screams a horrifying blend of human agony and demonic rage. The shadows in the room seemed to come alive, twisting and writhing in unnatural patterns. I could feel the demon's power surging, trying to break my resolve. "You cannot defeat me, Jonathan," the demonic voice hissed. "I have been a part of you for far too long." Ignoring the taunts, I pressed on, splashing holy water and brandishing the crucifix. The demon shrieked, its voice reverberating through the cell. Larson's eyes rolled back, and his body contorted in ways that defied human anatomy. The battle was fierce, the room filled with an oppressive darkness that seemed to suck the very air from our lungs. As the exorcism reached its peak, the demon revealed its true identity. "I am Malphas, an ancient spirit of chaos and destruction," it proclaimed. "Your family has been my plaything for generations, and now, you too will fall." A wave of dread washed over me, but I pushed it aside. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I command you to leave this man," I shouted, my voice resonating with unwavering faith. The relics in my hands seemed to glow with an inner light, a beacon of hope amidst the darkness. Malphas roared, a sound so deafening it felt as if the very foundations of the prison were shaking. Larson's body arched off the bed, and for a moment, I feared he would be torn apart by the violent forces at play. But then, with a final, guttural scream, the demon was expelled. Larson collapsed, his body limp and motionless. The oppressive darkness lifted, and the air seemed to clear. Larson's eyes fluttered open, his expression one of confusion and relief. "Father, is it over?" he whispered, his voice weak and trembling. I nodded, my own voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Michael, it's over. The demon is gone." But the victory was bittersweet. As I looked around the cell, I realized the true cost of the battle. The walls were scorched, and the air was thick with the scent of burning flesh. Father Thomas knelt beside me, his face pale but resolute. "You did it, Jonathan. You freed him." Yet, I knew the fight was not truly over. The scars of this encounter would stay with me, a constant reminder of the darkness that had haunted my family. The demon had been vanquished, but the shadow of its presence lingered. I would carry the weight of this battle for the rest of my life, always vigilant, always ready for the next confrontation with evil. As I left the prison that night, the stars seemed brighter, the air crisper. I had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but at a great personal cost. The true horror of the demon's influence had been revealed, and I had been forever changed by the experience. Do you believe that the battle between good and evil is ever truly over, or do the shadows of darkness linger, waiting for another opportunity to strike? If you like this supernatural story, please subscribe, like, and comment, and see the next supernatural horror story.